It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, just me, my husband, and my stepson. But at the last minute, my husband canceled. Work always came first for him, and I was always left feeling lonely. As my stepson and I set up the tent, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, a sensation I couldn't ignore. When I first met Charles, I thought I had found my forever. He was charming, ambitious, and had a way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the world. We met at a business conference, one of those high-end corporate events where everyone was trying to impress each other. But Charles wasn't like the rest. He wasn't just another man in a suit looking to climb the corporate ladder. He was already at the top. He had the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he wanted. And from the moment our eyes met, I felt like that person was me. Our love story felt like something out of a movie. Lavish dates, weekend getaways, and late-night conversations where we shared our deepest dreams. Charles was everything I had ever wanted: successful, intelligent, and deeply passionate. At least that's what I thought. It wasn't until after we got married that I realized something was missing. Charles was in finance, and to him, work wasn't just a job. It was his entire identity. He loved numbers more than people, and no matter how much he claimed he adored me, there was always something that seemed to come first. I should have seen the signs early on. Our honeymoon? Cut short for an urgent meeting. Our first anniversary? Celebrated with a last-minute dinner because he had been stuck in the office all day. My birthday? A string of missed calls and a text that read, "I'll make it up to you." It wasn't that he didn't love me, at least I told myself that, but his version of love was providing, working hard, and ensuring we had a comfortable life. I wanted a husband. I got a provider instead. It only got worse when I became a stepmother. Ethan was 17 when I married Charles. His mother had passed away when he was young, and Charles had been raising him alone ever since. When we met, Ethan was distant, cold even. I understood. His father was remarrying, and I was a stranger stepping into his mother's place. But over time, something changed. He started opening up to me in ways he never did with his father. While Charles buried himself in work, I was the one who showed up to his soccer games. I was the one who helped him with his college applications. I was the one who was there when he needed someone to talk to. And with every moment Charles missed, Ethan and I grew closer. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. Just the three of us, me, Charles, and Ethan. I had planned it for months, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this would be the time Charles finally put his work aside and focused on his family. But, as always, work came first. The night before we were set to leave, he got an urgent call. I didn't even bother arguing anymore. I already knew how this would end. "You and Ethan go without me," he said, barely looking up from his laptop. "I'll make it up to you." Of course he would. So it was just Ethan and me, driving up to the campsite and trying to pretend that everything was fine. But it wasn't. The drive up to the campsite had been quiet. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, watching the trees blur past, while I gripped the steering wheel, trying to push away the nagging guilt that sat heavy in my chest. It wasn't guilt for anything I had done, but for what I was starting to feel. The way Ethan had been looking at me lately, it wasn't the way a stepson should look at his father's wife. And worse, I wasn't looking away. We arrived just before sunset, the sky burning in deep hues of orange and red as we parked near the clearing. The air smelled like pine, crisp and earthy, and the only sounds were the distant chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the soft evening breeze. "This is a good spot," Ethan said, stepping out of the car and stretching. His shirt lifted slightly, revealing the sharp lines of his abdomen, and I quickly averted my gaze. I busied myself pulling out the tent while he gathered the poles. Setting up wasn't difficult, but it required teamwork. Every time he passed me a rod, our fingers brushed, small, fleeting touches that shouldn't have meant anything. But each one sent a jolt through me. And then it happened. I was securing the last part of the tent when I lost my balance, my foot slipping on a stray root. Before I could fall, Ethan was there. His hands gripped my waist, steadying me. Strong, warm. I looked up, startled, and met his eyes. He didn't let go. There was something in his gaze. Something deep, unreadable, and utterly consuming. The air between us thickened. His hands still rested on my waist, and I knew in that moment if I didn't step away, This would cross a line I could never uncross. But I didn't move. His fingers tightened, just slightly, as if testing a boundary neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Then, slowly, carefully, his hand slid up my side. Light, deliberate, tracing the curve of my body as though he was memorizing it. I sucked in a breath, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Ethan!" My voice was barely above a whisper. A warning? A plea? He hesitated, his fingers grazing my collarbone. And then, he leaned in. His lips brushed against my cheek, featherlight. A question more than a statement. I should have pulled away. I should have stopped this before it started. But instead, I closed my eyes. And that was all the permission he needed. His lips hovered near mine, warm breath mingling with my own, the space between us vanishing inch by inch. But just as he was about to close the gap completely, he stopped. A sharp inhale, a moment of hesitation. Then he pulled back, eyes dark with something I didn't want to name. "I'm sorry," he muttered, stepping away, running a hand through his hair. He turned his back to me, exhaling sharply as though trying to collect himself. I shouldn't have. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. Because the worst part wasn't that he had almost kissed me. The worst part was that I had wanted him to. The drive back from the campsite was filled with silence. Ethan didn't say much, and neither did I. It was like the space between us had expanded to an uncomfortable, suffocating degree, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had irrevocably changed. I told myself it was just a moment, an anomaly, a lapse in judgment. But the memory of his touch, the way he had held me, the heat in his gaze, those things lingered long after we returned home. At night, I found it hard to sleep. My mind raced, replaying the moment over and over. Each time it felt more intense, more real, like a dream I didn't want to wake up from but couldn't quite live in. And the guilt, it was suffocating. I loved Charles, I did, but every time I closed my eyes I could still feel Ethan's breath on my skin, his fingers brushing against me. I tried to act normal, but every time I saw Ethan, it felt like the world was closing in on me. His presence was magnetic, and no matter how hard I tried to avoid him, it seemed like we were drawn together. Charles was out of town again, another one of his never-ending business trips. As usual, he had left early in the morning, and I found myself with a whole day to myself. At first, I tried to enjoy the peace and quiet. I did the usual chores, vacuumed, dusted, and folded laundry. But every time I reached for the fabric softener, I couldn't help but think of Ethan. The way he had touched me, the way he had looked at me, his hand lingering on my waist like it belonged there. It was maddening. I focused on the laundry. The task was simple, repetitive, something I could get lost in. But just as I was sorting through the clothes, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, startled, to see Ethan standing in the doorway of the laundry room. His expression was unreadable, calm yet intense. "I didn't know you were home," I said, my voice betraying the tension that had settled in my chest. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice low, almost soothing. But there was something about it, a sharpness, a quiet confidence that sent a shiver down my spine. For a moment, we just stood there, looking at each other, the air between us thick with unspoken words. His eyes flickered to my lips, and my heart skipped a beat. He was standing too close for comfort. "I was wondering if you needed any help," he said, stepping into the room, his movements slow, deliberate. I felt trapped, caught between the woman I was and the woman I was starting to become. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. "No, it's okay, I've got it." But Ethan wasn't backing away. Instead, he took a step closer, his body just inches from mine. His presence was overwhelming. "You sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper now. His breath was warm against my ear, and I felt my pulse quicken. I should have told him to leave. I should have said something, anything, to break the tension. But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded, too frozen in the moment to react. And that was when he touched me again. This time, it was different. It wasn't a casual brush of the fingers or a fleeting touch. He placed his hand on my arm, the heat from his palm seeping through the fabric of my shirt. Slowly, his hand slid down, tracing the curve of my arm, his touch lingering in a way that made my skin burn. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, paralyzed, as his touch traveled lower, past my elbow, down to my wrist. His fingers circled my wrist, just barely grazing my skin, sending a wave of heat through my body. And then he leaned in, his breath hot against my neck. I felt his lips graze the delicate skin just below my ear, and I gasped, the sound escaping before I could stop it. His lips were soft, feather-light against my skin, but the intention was clear. His hand tightened around my wrist, pulling me slightly closer, as if urging me to give in. I closed my eyes, torn between the woman I'd promised myself I would be and the woman I was becoming. I shouldn't have let him touch me. I shouldn't have let him get this close. But my body was betraying me. Every nerve was alive, and it was all I could do to keep my composure. For a moment, everything else faded away. There was no laundry room, no chores, no Charles. There was only Ethan standing before me, his hand on my skin, his lips brushing against my neck. And then, just as quickly as he had come, he pulled away. I'm sorry, he muttered, his voice rough. I didn't mean to, but I couldn't speak. My breath was shallow, my heart racing. He hadn't kissed me. No, it wasn't that far yet, but he had gotten so close. Too close. Ethan stepped back, running a hand through his hair as though trying to compose himself. I can't stop thinking about that night, he admitted, his voice strained. The way you looked at me, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have, but I didn't let him finish. I stepped forward, closing the gap between us, and without thinking, I reached out, my hand finding his chest, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. The moment our skin touched again, everything inside me exploded. I feel guilty. I've tried to convince myself that what's happening isn't wrong, but deep down, I know the truth. I know that this isn't who I am, that I should be loyal to Charles, that I should never have let this go as far as it has. But I can't stop. The connection, the intimacy, it's been something I've been craving for so long. With Charles, it was never about passion. It was about duty, about being the perfect wife. But with Ethan, it's different. I know this can't last forever. I'm not naive enough to think that we can keep this hidden forever. The truth will always come out. I know that eventually someone will find out and it will all come crashing down. But am I the one to blame? Can I really say I didn't want this? Didn't need it in some twisted way? Tell me in the comments. Maybe someone out there can give me the clarity I need before it's too late. And that's why I'm sharing my story. Because I'm caught in this mess and I need to understand where I've gone wrong. If you've ever been in a situation like mine, or if you have advice to share, please leave a comment below. Let's talk. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories like mine.